So thank you very much, Elizabeth, for joining us this evening.
Sure.
We read your book in November, and I had so much wonderful feedback. We really do love historical fiction, but above and beyond that, the different points of view, just the subject matter in itself, the fact that it was it was based on a true occurrence, the Titanic sinking, and all of the historical fact that came along with that. It was really, really interesting, and I know a lot of the women loved it. So we're excited to dive in and ask you some questions. The first question I have for you this evening is if you could just give us a little bit of background about yourself and about your writing experience and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Number one, thank you so much, everyone who's here. I'm just thrilled, and I enjoyed writing this book, and I'm excited to talk about it, and just so grateful to anyone who read it. So thank you. I, like probably many other authors, just started out as a just voracious reader. As long as I can remember, I was just always reading. I wouldn't go to bed at night without reading first. But I never met anyone who actually wrote for a living, like as their job. So I sort of thought of authors as these mythical creatures who lived in New York and were super connected and didn't have much to do with me personally. So even if, in my heart of hearts, I thought it would be wonderful to be able to write a book, it didn't sort of seem like a realistic option for me personally. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I came to the Chicago area for college. I went to Northwestern University, and I studied history, which just because that was the subject I loved the most, even though I had no idea where it would lead me for a job. And, believe me, everyone asked me for years of college, oh, history, what will you do with that? Are you going to be a teacher? And I thought, oh, I don't know. I'm just taking the courses I love. And then I went into book editing in Chicago, proofreading, editing. There are kind of trade professional publishers here. So I was, reading books that were not necessarily interesting, but kind of getting familiar with the publishing process. And at a certain point, I thought, wow, if I ever want to try writing, my 20s are the time to do it. But I still thought to myself, oh, you can't actually write fiction. That's for super artistic people. You're practical. So I went back to school, got my master's in journalism, because this was the 90s when journalism was like still a respectable field with job opportunities. That's a way you can write but still get a real job. So I sort of transitioned into journalism, worked for some regional magazines in the Midwest US. And then actually, it was after I had my first child, she's 16. So 16 years ago that I said to myself, I quit my job, started sort of part-time home. And I just sort of said to myself, if you ever are going to try writing fiction, like this is the time. Don't, stop putting it off. Stop being afraid of it. And so kind of on my own, without telling anyone, I started writing a book at night after she had gone to sleep. And so my first book was called While Beauty Slept, and it was sort of a historical fiction retelling of Sleeping Beauty. And I had no idea as I was writing it, is this marketable? Will anyone buy this? Will any agent be interested? I really just did it for myself to prove that I could do it. And I will admit, it took years. It took a year to find an agent. It took a year to get it published. But that book was published in 2014. And, since then I've been a fiction writer. So it was a long journey, but I often tell people, you see all these lists about, sort of the best 30 writers under 30. A lot of us don't really figure it out until a little after that. And that's okay. You find the right time for you, if that makes sense.
So is three books, that's how many you've written?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my next question is, did you find it easier to write your second and third?
Well, as I said, I wrote the first book telling nobody. because I didn't want to sort of have people's expectations raised, because if you tell people, oh, I'm working on a book, then every time you see them, how's the book? How's the book? So in a way, the first one was kind of the least pressure because no one knew. And I sort of told myself, this may go nowhere, it may never leave my computer, and no one may ever read it, and that's okay, because I'm still just proud of myself for going through the process. Not gonna lie, the second book was really hard because that's when I felt the pressure of, oh, people now know, they know I'm an author. And they would start asking me, like, oh, you're writing your next book. What's it about? How's it going? And sometimes it was going terribly, but you feel like you have to be like, chugging along. Yes, any minute. So for me, it got a little harder only because of that kind of public expectation in a very nice way, friends and relatives, like in a very loving way, asking about your work and feeling like, oh, I don't want to let them down.
I can completely understand that. We have some really great questions about the actual book itself, but before we jump into that, I know that you have lived all over the world, and I just wanted to ask, how has that really shaped your writing?
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't expect you to ask that. For anyone who doesn't know, my father worked for the U.S. Foreign Service. He was a diplomat as I was growing up. So we lived off and on in other countries. And I absolutely think that helped me as a writer, shaped me as a writer, really. Because whenever you start out somewhere new in a different culture, you are the outsider, right? You are the observer. And you are forced to look at the world from a new perspective. And I think that's so important for a writer. If you only see things through your own upbringing, your own culture, your own personal background, you can't ever write diverse characters, I think. And so there's no question to me that kind of growing up, being forced to adjust to different realities, if you will, definitely helped me as a writer.
Okay, interesting. So I'm actually calling in from Canada. I am a Canadian, and I have obviously two questions from two Canadians.
Great.
And one of them is, Carla has asked here, have you ever been to the Titanic gravesite in Halifax, Nova Scotia?
I haven't. I would love to go. That's on my list. I'm not even joking. I was just talking to someone not long ago that's kind of on my short list of future travel plans. No, but thanks to that question, I'm going to move that up to number one on my travel list. I would love to go. Yes.
And then I have another question from a Canadian, which I have now lost it. Oh, here it is. They would like to know about a specific, okay, I've lost it again. I will come back to that one. I got it emailed to me and the email just disappeared.
Okay. We've all been there. Yeah.
So how about we just go back, actually, since you just shared with us your history, if you can tell us a little bit about the difference actually between writing as a journalist and writing as an author.
Yes. Well, I mean, there are plenty of people that kind of do both. But in a way, one is harder than the other. They're both hard in their own way. But in a way, I think actually journalism is a little easier because, you have sort of a roadmap of where to go. And I'm not going to say I was writing, world-changing journalism. I was writing things like 10 best new restaurants in Chicago or fabulous kitchen makeover, but you interview people, they tell you what's going on, they give you the form of the story. When you're a fiction writer, kind of up to you. And in a way, it's really scary. I mean, it's wonderfully liberating, but also very scary to have that blank page and say to yourself, I can literally do anything, right? So you have to, your mind has to kind of be open in a different way. With journalism, I always felt very strongly, your sources, the people you talk to, are the ones that lead where the story goes. You should not start a story knowing the ending, right? You talk to the right people and you see where it takes you. Fiction's a little bit scarier, but it's definitely more fun for me.
Okay, very good. So the other question I had from a Canadian, and I know Kate's on this call tonight, but she had emailed this to me earlier. So she wanted to know, she's curious if you've ever come across a gentleman by the name of Arthur Godfrey Peuchen, Peuchen. He was a lieutenant and was president and general manager of Stoddard Chemical Company.
Yes, he was a very important witness at the United States congressional inquiries.
That's exactly right. It's like it was a test.
Some connection to him?
No, he was a Canadian.
Yes.
So,
yes. I'm sorry I wasn't able to make him a character in the book. That name is absolutely familiar because he, there were certain people that gave really important testimony when the U.S. had their investigation, and I read through all that testimony. And he was one of the people, he was in one of the lifeboats, obviously, because he survived. He was one of the people that actually knew how to steer a boat, right? Because many of the crew members on the Titanic were, stewards, which is basically like a, hotel worker, or they were engine men, shoveling coal. They had no idea how to actually steer a boat in the open sea. And I don't know how to pronounce his name right, and I don't want to embarrass him.
Well, I just did, so.
Something like that. But he was one of the passengers that actually had he was a yachtsman, and he knew how to work a boat in the sea. And so his testimony was actually really important because he understood some of the challenges in steering those lifeboats. But so yes, he's a very well-known sort of character within the Titanic world. Yes, and he was Canadian.
We love that. So the other thing that a lot of questions are around are the research that you did for the historical fiction. Yeah. And I will ask I'll ask a question that Juliet sent me by email today. She was wondering what kind of historical research you did for the novel, if any. How did this research help inform her characters and story? She says she's working on her own historical fiction writing project at the moment, and she's so curious to see how other writers make use of the information they come across in their research.
Yes, number one, hooray for anyone writing historical fiction. It's so much harder than people realize, I think, sometimes. So I just encourage anyone who's interested, stick with it. Yes, I did a lot of research. I had always kind of been interested in the Titanic. I get into this a little bit in my author notes at the end of the book. So I didn't come to this book knowing nothing. I already owned a few history books, in fact, about it. But especially if you're going to take on the Titanic, I knew that there are people out there who are hardcore fans and know everything. So I felt a huge responsibility to get the details right, because I knew if I described one thing wrong, all my online reviews would be like, she messed up the number of this lifeboat. Don't trust anything about this book. So I very much felt especially if you're taking on a very well-known historical event, you have to get the details right, or else people won't trust the truth of the whole book. So there's a lot out there, but as I said, I read all the official US congressional investigation testimony, which wonderfully is online, so it's easy to read through. So all the questioning between US senators and various crew members and survivors. I read probably a dozen books that gave different aspects of the tragedy and just sort of the larger social issues of the time. And I knew I wasn't going to write, the definitive description of the sinking with every detail, with every famous passenger, but I just to make sure that I got the little details right, what decks were the lifeboats on, and How was third class different from first class in terms of what the staterooms looked like? Just those little things that people would pick up on if they were wrong. And then I will also say that my publisher hired a wonderful fact checker. And this is something that I would recommend to every author. Hopefully your publisher pays for it, or maybe you hire someone on your own, but just someone to go through and double check facts, because there were things, I rewrote. There were things that I were inconsistent or that I messed up here and there. And so I was also very blessed with a fact checker that gave me a long list of things to just double and triple check, so that I could be confident that I got those little details right.
You're so right, though. I don't know anything about the Titanic. Like, I know more now, other than Rose and I forget his name.
Jack.
Jack, of course.
Yes.
But that's my history.
That's fine. Yes.
Knowledge of the Titanic. So, but you're right. There will be people who have lost people in the Titanic, and they would perhaps take quite an interest in it. And if you messed anything up, I could certainly see that.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I have a question here from Catherine, and she's actually our host in the Chicago chapter. Yeah, so she wants to know what you think, why you think the Titanic is so fascinating and endures in history.
Yes. Oh, wonderful question, because it is something I have sort of wondered myself. Like, why am I still interested in this ship that sank more than 100 years ago? Right? There've been plenty of other ships. But I think it's well, not just the fact that it was a kind of tragedy, but I think so much of what happened then kind of still resonates today. It was, after it sank, thanks to telegraph messages, people around the world heard about it. So literally, as the survivors were being put on the rescue ship, messages were going around the world to newspapers. Titanic is sunk. At the time the survivors arrived in New York, there were 40,000 people standing on the piers in New York City to see them coming in. Sort of like a, I don't know, mass media event would be today, right? Newspapers were clamoring for survivor stories. They were writing about the Titanic for weeks afterwards. The fact that the government got involved right away. I think years before, a ship would sink and it would be sort of put down to act of God, bad luck, it just happened. But this was sort of entering the modern age where something terrible happens, there must be a reason. Who's to blame? Who can we, how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? Which was a big reason behind the U.S. congressional inquiry. So, the fact that there were rich and famous people on board, which is kind of fits in with today's celebrity culture. People were fascinated by what happened to these rich millionaires who went down with the ship. So I think it's just the fact that there are still kind of parallels to what we're interested in today about the idea of, the rich and famous on this glamorous, wonderful ship, and something terrible happens, right? That intersection between richness and fame and tragedy. We still follow those kinds of stories today.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's just totally fascinating. Another question about the history is, this is a great question, actually. So it's from Jen, and she's asked, what was something interesting you read about in your research for this book, but that you weren't able to work into the novel? And I hope we're not putting you on the spot.
Ooh, okay. Well, anything really interesting, I tried to get in the book, obviously. Let's see. That's a wonderful, wonderful question. I'm trying to think if there was something I couldn't actually fit in. I guess, let's see. I used aspects of what I learned where I could. Oh dear, I'll come back to that.
What about,
ask me the question.
Elizabeth, what about that, the blog post you wrote for us? Maybe you want to share one of those with the girls. if you can
Yes.
remember them offhand.
Yes, thank you. Yes, there were a few things, I guess. I think, yeah, let's see. Number one, not that I went into the political implications, but the fact that, literally like the day after the Titanic sank, the United States government, some senators in the United States government said, we're doing an investigation right away. And all of the crew were British. And so the second the survivors landed in New York, all the British crew members figured they would be put on a ship right away and go back to England. But they were forced to stay in the United States for a week, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks, to testify. And the British government thought this was ridiculous and terrible. The Americans had no right to interrogate their brave sailors who had done their best in the midst of disaster. So it actually kind of caused an international incident, with the British saying, send our men home, and the Americans saying, well, they're here and they have been subpoenaed and they are, by law required to give testimony. Actually a lot of very bad blood between the British and the American government after the Titanic sinking. So there's an example that didn't really fit into the storyline for my book.
Thank you. Okay, so we have so many questions here now. I'm trying to keep them all in a genre.
That's all right.
Savannah, I haven't forgotten yours. I will ask yours once we get into the actual character development. I did just want to finish off Catherine's questions, and she has asked what you think of the new Titanic 2, which is due to set sail on the original route on 2022.
Yes, I'm sort of obsessed with it, of course. I think it's fascinating that anyone would really pour that much money into it. Would I sail on it? I guess if I could write it off as a business expense, but no, to me, it's just more proof that people are, still fascinated, which is really interesting.
And Catherine has actually just gone ahead and shared a link to the new Titanic story. So if anybody wants to read it, you can click the link for CBS News there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Okay, let's go into the characters now. So Savannah said, why did you choose Charlie's death for the reason to bring the 3 women together?
Oh, poor Charlie. Yes, I went through many different possibilities for, how can I give a reason that 20 years later these particular people meet again? And yes, I tried various things that did not work. Surprise, that's the writer's life. But I guess I felt like I did really want to explore the idea of Esme's marriage that some people would look at as a, wonderful love story, and what was the truth behind it. And I guess I thought if he was rich enough and prominent enough, that was the kind of news that would be shared all over the world, so that, Anna living on a farm, way out in the country would hear about it, and also Charlotte in England would have heard about it. So I guess just the idea that his death would be an event that would touch all of their lives just because he was so well known.
All right, and we have Carla, who wants to know what character you related to most in the book, and if you write yourself into your books.
Oh, that's such a good question. Of course, we all write ourselves into all our characters. You take an aspect of yourself into every character. But I will tell you that Charlotte took over this book in a way I had not expected. I've often heard writers talk about, I just started writing and, this character just wrote for me. And I hadn't ever really had that experience before. And in fact, when I was doing the first draft of this book, I had Esme figured out. I knew I wanted a rich American. I had Anna figured out. I knew I wanted a Scandinavian immigrant. And I just didn't know. I said, I want someone from second class. I think she should be British. I just don't know who she should be. And I'm not kidding. I would lie in bed at night wondering, I would wake up in the middle of the night wondering. Various versions of her. But once I kind of hit on the idea of con artist / journalist, and based on my own experience in that profession, I saw some similarities between those two jobs. She just had her voice. I knew who she was. I knew what she wanted to do. And in fact, when I turned in my first draft of the book, Esme was originally the first character that you meet. It was kind of her story first, because I was going first class, second class, third class. And my editor read the book and said, it's clear from this that you like Charlotte the best. I think we need to write. I'm like, oh, okay, yes. So there's my answer.
That's great. Sorry, I just want to ask, this is my own question actually. So I'm so curious about authors and when they do it and they do it well, like you have, when you do the multiple time periods,
yes,
jumping back and like, how do you plan that, or how is that done effectively? Because you've really done it well.
Depends on the person. I'm sure you've talked to other authors. They talk about, who's a plotter and who is a pantser. Have you had that?
I've heard those before, yeah.
Right? Are you plotting or are you going by the seat of your pants?
Right.
And from what I've heard, it's 50-50, just depends on you, your personality. I am a plotter. I'm that kind of person who, if I'm taking a trip, I want to know, where am I going? Where am I staying each night? What time is breakfast? That's just how I am in life. So that's how I am in books. So I did plot it out. But as I was writing this, I at times said to myself, oh my God, you idiot. I basically am writing 6 books, because I was writing Charlotte, Esme, Anna in the past, Charlotte, Esme, Anna, in the 30s. What have I done to myself? I did work on each section on its own and sort of thought of each section as its own little book. And what were the main things I wanted to say or get accomplished in this section? Then, 7 books, because then there was the lifeboat chapter. So I really made things difficult for myself. But I wrote each section kind of on its own, stuck them together, and then went through and said, oh, I have to change this part so it matches this other part. But it was kind of like putting a puzzle together. It really was, yeah.
So the part that was most disbelieving for me was when they're actually in the lifeboats and the conversations that they're having, because I can't believe that they are going through this and experience probably what was the worst night of their life, and they're talking about mundane, everyday things. Is there proof that that actually happened?
Yes, and believe me, I was very aware as I was writing it that this will sound false. They're going around introducing each other, right? The ship is literally sinking, in their view. And they're, I'm Mrs. So-and-so, and I'm from Boston, and oh, do you know my husband? That it was a different time. And if you read through, as I said, the testimony that people gave, no one was talking about sobbing or freaking out or crying. It was all about stiff upper lip, being brave, doing my duty. And most to many of the women in these lifeboats had left husbands on board. Almost every second class man died. And it's hard for us now to kind of put yourself in that place, that you would be sitting in a boat knowing that your husband was most likely drowning, and that you would be sort of having conversation or singing songs, which is absolutely a thing that happened in 1 or 2 of the lifeboats. They sang to distract themselves from what was happening. You didn't, there was just something about putting your best face forward and not showing emotion that was considered the right thing to do at the time. And I have, as I said, read many first-person accounts. There was no lifeboat where anyone freaked out to the extent that I even wrote about. You know, that chapter has more emotion than any other lifeboat incident that I read about. Whatever feelings people had, they just kept them very much bottled in.
Even when I asked the question, I was actually thinking about the people drowning around them and how they could survive
Yes.
that. But you're right. Like they had loved ones on the boat that were not coming with them. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. Yes. And I mentioned this a little bit in my author's note at the end, but that's one of the questions, honestly, that haunted me, you know, for years and during my research. The boats were there, you know, they could have pulled people out of, hardly anyone was pulled out of the water. And you think these women are there and they know their husbands are there, right? But there was just this sort of mass, I don't know, delusion or something that we're safer where we are. We don't want to rock the boat. Pardon my use of that metaphor. I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to make a fuss. You know, this sailor is telling me to keep rowing, so I'll row. And as far as I've been able to tell, there were women who asked, can we go back and rescue people? And were told, no, it's too dangerous. And just sort of went, all right. You know, they were used to kind of deferring to authority.
Juliet makes a good point here. She says they're probably also in shock.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. And I think also many people really did expect a rescue ship to be coming any minute. That was part of it too, you know, that they thought, oh, well, you know, we've sent out the SOS, you know, help is on its way. Yeah. But shock for sure was part of it.
Well, and you can read about that, how disbelief, like people weren't even getting off the boat when it was like clear it was going down because they thought, oh, the Titanic can't sink.
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So Juliet also asks here, whose relationship did you find to be the most successful? I know that you purposely left the ending for Charlotte and Edmund Healy open-ended at the conclusion of the book, but what ending do you see being the most likely for them?
For them, oh, I hope they get together. I mean, he's married, so that I feel torn about that too. I'd love to know what people think about that ending, because in fact, I was kind of on the fence myself, of like, do I need to just resolve this or not? And I don't know why, but I sort of wanted to give readers like a little bit of agency, that it can be the ending you want it to be, if that makes sense. Charlotte will be fine either way. You know, she has these options. She has these ways that things can work out. But whether or not they're together in a romantic sense, they'll still be together in a friendship sense, you know, in terms of sharing something that they have survived together. And so I liked the idea of readers kind of deciding for themselves. But, you know, of course, I you know, it would be lovely if they ended up together, as long as his wife was fine with that and happier doing something else.
Fair enough. We have some feedback.
Like to make it complicated, yes.
We have some feedback about the ending. Catherine said she liked the ending as an anti-love story open question. And Juliet said they seemed to be kindred spirits, and so she hoped that they got together as well. Now let's just change gears a little bit. Ladies, if you want to ask any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand, or that's a functionality. You don't actually have to raise your hand. Or you can just ask in the chat window on the right of your screen. But we're going to just change gears and ask you a few questions about yourself, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
So what are you reading right now?
Oh, so I just finished The Death of Mrs. Westaway, Ruth Ware.
Okay.
Who else has read that or anything by her?
Yeah. I have read Women in Cabin 10.
Mm-hmm.
And she's written something else, but I can't remember what right now. It was good.
You
like it, or are you liking it?
Yes, I've read all her books. Women in Cabin 10 was not my favorite. It was good, but Death of Mrs. Westaway I really enjoyed. If you like, you know, creepy British country house and a, creepy housekeeper and lots of family secrets. There's some echoes to Rebecca that I enjoyed. But, if you want that sort of Gothic English setting and, mysteries from the past, it's just a, good, enjoyable read. So I would definitely recommend that. That's that I just finished. And I'm right now in the middle of a book called Circe by Madeline Miller, which
Does it have a Greek goddess?
Yes.
Front? Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of a retelling from Greek mythology. I'm not going to pretend that I knew all the myths in question, but if you're kind of interested in mythology at all, it's very well written, and yeah, kind of a story of a woman finding her strength in a very patriarchal society. I'll just leave it there.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Jen says she loved that book, so you've got to.
Good.
Yeah. What about favorite authors or favorite books of all times?
Yes, I brought a few a little show and tell items with me.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Thought this might come up. So of course I read all the time. There's many, many authors I like. But in terms of historical fiction, I would say my all-time favorite author is Sarah Waters. Does anyone
we've read one of her books in book club.
Ooh, which one?
The Stranger or the
Little Stranger.
No. Sorry, maybe I'm just something about a woman. A woman comes and stays, moves in with her.
Guest.
The paying guest.
Yes, I know. I'm kind of a super fan. Yes, I think she, talk about someone who does her research and really creates a mood and a setting, and you sort of feel like you're there. This is my favorite of hers, The Little Stranger, which is another creepy English country house book. So clearly that's kind of like a theme for me. But her books are ones that I kind of like get lost in, the kind where I'm like, I shut my door and tell my family to leave me alone. Don't talk to me for a while because I'm like in my book psychologically. Let's see. Oh, here's another one. Agatha Christie, just kind of all-time classic, favorite, readable author. I kind of consider her my version of comfort food, like having a macaroni and cheese or a good bowl of soup, you just settle in and you'll kind of be satisfied.
I feel like there's a very British theme going on here.
Yeah. And then, now I'm going to switch to, so American, The Secret History.
Donna Tartt, okay.
Which is dark and weird and twisted and all the rest of it, but is probably the book that I have reread the most times. I would say I've probably read it 5 or 6 times. And every time I read it, I just kind of discover something new. So they're all kind of a little dark. So take that however you want.
Did Donna Tartt write The Nightingale? Is that right? What else has she written, Donna Tartt?
I didn't love her other.
The Goldfinch, that's it.
Yeah, it was okay. It's very long. So not my favorite, but yeah.
I know it was a bird.
Nightingale was wonderful, though. I love that book.
Yeah, that's not by her.
But I still like it.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your how you write, where you write, if you need to escape your house, if you do it in 10-hour stints?
I wish I wrote for 10 hours, ladies. I really wish that my life would be so much easier. Great question, because I always ask other authors this question because I'm hoping they'll give me some insights to make me more efficient. Obviously it depends. I do have a little space in my house that's, my own desk and computer and my own little setup. And I use that mostly for emailing and Facebook. And when I try to actually get a big chunk of writing done in my house, of course, I start thinking, I should do the laundry, or, that shelf looks dusty. I really should clean, which is pathetic that I would rather clean than, concentrate. But if I'm doing a really focused session of writing, I go to my local library, and I live outside Chicago. My town and the towns around me have lovely public libraries, which are basically my workspace. So I'll sort of do the rounds of, oh, I haven't been to this one in, 2 weeks. I think I'll write there today. If I'm really chugging through, like need a few hours in a row. But otherwise, I'll do an hour or so in my house at night when my kids are in bed. Wish I was a morning person. I keep hearing from other authors who are like, I get up at 5 when the house is quiet and everyone is asleep and I get so much done. Unfortunately, I'm all about sleep at 5 in the morning. But to me, it's just important to kind of alternate where I'm working, not just one place, because I do think mixing it up kind of makes me a little more creative.
Very good. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. We just have one more question for you before we'll sign off and let everybody go back to their evenings. But do you belong to a book?
Oh, I do. Yes. Of course I do. And, yes, I've been going to one for about, oh my gosh, since my daughter was a little baby, and she's 16, so 15, 16 years. And to me, honestly, it's been a lifesaver, because I was a new mom and sleep deprived, and I'd always been a reader, and I sort of thought, oh, well, that's something I'm, gonna kind of lose, because a lot of people kind of said to me, well, you won't have time for yourself anymore, you'll be too tired to read. And I found that like really depressing. But this woman friend reached out to me and said, just, we'd love to have you come when you can. And just the idea that it kept me connected to the outside world, it kept me connected to other women. They're very eclectic readers, so a lot of the books they choose are not ones that you kind of hear about. They like the idea of reading books from other countries or from kind of lesser known authors. And it was really important just to sort of prove to myself, I can be doing this crazy transition into new mom life, but I can keep reading, I can still have an adult conversation. I can still leave my house occasionally. So I'm a huge fan of book clubs. And, in my own life, I've seen that it's made a really big difference.
Well, that is a lovely testament to book clubs. I said it was the last question, but I do have one more. Have they read your book in book club?
Oh, no. That's so funny. No. Oh my God. I would feel so awkward. Are you kidding? Can you imagine? Like someone reads it and like didn't actually like it. And it was like, it was interesting. No, I feel like, I'd love for them to read it just on their own, of course. But, I feel like that's putting a little bit too much pressure on those lovely women.
Fair enough. Well, ladies, thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for writing the book and for getting it out there. And we can't wait to see what's next. No pressure.
Yeah, get writing. And I read your December book, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Yes.
It's really good. Oh, you'll have a good discussion. There's lots to talk about with that one.
That's awesome. Everybody is saying thank you for joining us in the chat window.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye, ladies.
Bye.